Welcome to the Story Behind Scripture, Books of the Bible series. This week, when God pulls the strings for such a time as this, a deep dive into the book of Esther.
I want you to imagine the most gripping political thriller you've ever seen on screen.
Oh, I love a good thriller. If you're talking like a sprawling epic.
Exactly. A sprawling epic narrative. It's got whispered assassination plots in the shadows, and it features this vain, wildly unpredictable dictator who basically rules half the known world.
Right, the stakes are massive.
Massive. It revolves around royal decrees of actual systematic genocide, sweeping empires, and, a terrifyingly literal ticking clock counting down to doomsday.
It genuinely has all the elements of a Hollywood blockbuster. I mean, the stakes could not possibly be higher.
Yeah.
And the protagonist is, well, one of the most unlikely heroes you could ever imagine.
Right. But here's the paradox that completely blows my mind. What we are describing here, it isn't a screenplay.
No.
It isn't a modern historical fiction novel either. This is literally a book of the Bible. It's the book of Esther.
Which is fascinating because it doesn't read like one.
Not at all. If you sit down and read it, it defies almost everything you might expect from a biblical text. I mean, there are no parting Red Seas.
No burning bushes.
Right. There are no towering prophets calling down fire from heaven. And most shockingly of all, the name of God is never once mentioned in the entire text.
Not a single time.
Which is wild.
It's an incredible detail. In ancient times, that glaring omission actually caused quite a bit of debate among scholars about whether the Book of Esther should even be included in the biblical canon at all.
Because it just seems so secular.
Exactly. If you just read it on the surface, it feels entirely secular. It reads like a brutal, kind of gritty, historical account of ancient Persian court politics.
And that is exactly our mission for this deep dive. We've got this massive stack of deep study notes, historical records, theological commentaries, and, our goal today is to explore this incredible paradox.
It's a great mission.
We are going to trace the story of a highly vulnerable Jewish orphan who rises through this terrifying, oppressive system to become the queen of the Persian Empire.
And she risks absolutely everything to stop a catastrophic plot.
Right.
And as we frame this narrative, it's really crucial to understand that we aren't just looking at a story of palace intrigue.
Okay, what are we looking at then?
It is a profound, incredibly reverent exploration of what theologians call the hidden providence of God.
Hidden providence. I like that.
Right. The central message of Esther is that even when God appears entirely absent from the text, and by extension, from our own circumstances, His unseen hand is governing every single coincidence.
Every random bureaucratic event.
Exactly. All of it is used to preserve the Jewish people. And through that preservation, He is protecting the specific ancestral lineage that leads directly to Christ.
I love that framework. But to really appreciate how the invisible hand of providence is working here, we have to understand the visible world these people are trapped in.
Which is incredibly intimidating.
It really is. The year is 483 BC. The Persian Empire is at the absolute dizzying height of its power. We're talking about a superpower that spans 127 provinces.
Stretching all the way from India down to Ethiopia.
Right. And the capital city is Susa, which is located in modern-day Iran. And the man sitting on the throne is King Xerxes.
Who is also known in the Hebrew text as Ahasuerus.
Ahasuerus.
King Xerxes is one of the most powerful and frankly one of the most volatile monarchs of the ancient world.
Volatile is a good word for him.
Very much so. To give you a sense of his psychological profile, historical records outside the Bible, like those from the Greek historian Herodotus, they tell us this is a man who once ordered the sea to be whipped with chains.
Wait, whipped with chains? Like the actual ocean?
The actual ocean, because a storm destroyed his pontoon bridge. He expects total, unquestioning submission from the universe itself.
That is insane. But it makes the opening scene of this book makes so much sense. To demonstrate his unimaginable power, Xerxes throws a banquet that completely defies modern comprehension.
Oh, it's staggering.
It lasts for 180 days. That is 6 solid months of displaying the staggering wealth of his empire.
But we have to ask why, right?
Right?
Why throw a 6-month party?
Right, nobody just parties for half a year for no reason.
Historically, we know this wasn't just a lavish celebration. This was a massive military and political summit.
Okay.
Xerxes was preparing for his infamous, massive invasion of Greece. He is wooing his regional governors, his military commanders, his princes. He's trying to secure their financial and military commitment for a hostile takeover.
Right. This is the exact same invasion prep that eventually leads to the famous Battle of Thermopylae with the 300 Spartans.
Exactly, the very same one.
So he's showing off, he's flexing for his generals, and after this 180-day political marathon, he decides to throw a smaller, highly exclusive 7-day feast for all the men present in the citadel of Susa.
But, it's also a deeply unstable environment.
Yeah, because by the 7th day, the text notes that the king is merry with wine.
Which is a polite, ancient way of saying he is completely inebriated.
Just totally wasted. And in this drunken state, surrounded by his military commanders, he makes a highly inappropriate demand.
He does.
He commands his queen, Vashti, to come out wearing her royal crown to parade her beauty before this room of drunken soldiers.
And Queen Vashti refuses.
Which is a stunning moment.
It really is. She protects her dignity, she sets a boundary, but in doing so, she strikes a massive blow to the ego of the most powerful man on earth.
And she does it in front of all his subordinates, the very men he has spent 6 months trying to impress.
Exactly. In the ancient Persian court, a woman's refusal of the king's direct command was unheard of. It wasn't just a marital dispute.
It was treason.
Yes, an act of political insubordination. And the reaction of the king's inner circle really reflects that.
It sets off an absolute panic. The king's advisors are terrified. They essentially say, listen, if the queen can defy the king of the Persian Empire, what happens tomorrow morning when all the noble women in the empire hear about this?
Right. We are going to have a kingdom-wide rebellion of wives.
It reads like a petty domestic dispute blown up to an absurd geopolitical scale.
It does sound almost comical to modern ears, but the fear was genuine. In an autocratic empire built entirely on the concept of absolute submission to authority, any crack in that facade is viewed as a threat to the state.
So they have to make an example of her.
Right. So the king's wise men, specifically a counselor named Memucan, they advise Xerxes to depose Vashti, banish her forever, and issue a ridiculous empire-wide decree.
The decree stating that every man be master in his own household. It's an exercise in supreme vanity and insecurity. They used the massive, expensive machinery of the Persian postal system to send out a royal edict, basically saying, the king says you have to listen to your husbands. But while it highlights the absurdity of Xerxes' court, it also creates a massive, highly dangerous vacuum of power.
Because Queen Vashti is gone.
Right. The throne beside Xerxes is now completely empty.
And that empty throne is the catalyst for everything that follows. When the king's anger eventually subsides, his attendants suggest a solution to his loneliness.
An empire-wide search for beautiful young virgins to be brought to the harem in Susa, from whom the king will select a new queen.
Basically, a mandatory state-sponsored beauty pageant.
The pageant makes it sound voluntary and glamorous. When you read the historical context, this is a forced roundup.
It's incredibly dark.
These young women are being taken from their homes, separated from their families, and locked in a royal harem. For the vast majority of them, even if they aren't chosen as queen, they will never leave that complex.
No, they won't. They're effectively state property.
And it is right here that our heroes enter the story.
The narrative suddenly zooms in on a man named Mordecai.
Right. He is a Jewish exile living in Susa, and the text gives us a very specific lineage for him.
It says he is a descendant of the tribe of Benjamin, specifically from the family of a man named Kish.
Which will be hugely important later. And Mordecai is raising his orphaned younger cousin, a young woman named Hadassah.
Hadassah is her Hebrew name, which beautifully translates to myrtle, a plant known for its sweet fragrance and resilience.
But she operates under her Persian name.
Right, Esther. What's fascinating here is the layered meaning of that name. Etymologically, Esther is related to the Persian word for star.
Okay.
But if you look at the Hebrew root of the word Esther, it means something hidden.
Oh, wow.
And that concept of hiddenness becomes the defining motif of her entire life and really the theological engine of the book itself.
Because she has to hide who she is. The soldiers come, and Esther is literally taken, swept up in this terrifying empire-wide dragnet and brought into the king's harem.
But before she goes, Mordecai gives her strict, non-negotiable instructions.
Do not reveal your people or your kindred. She has to hide her Jewish identity.
Which makes perfect sense. They are an exiled minority living in the capital of a pagan empire. Anti-Semitism wasn't invented in the 20th century.
Right. It was a very real, very dangerous reality in the ancient Near East. Revealing her heritage could have made her a target or disqualified her entirely.
Absolutely.
So she goes into this massive royal complex entirely alone, carrying this immense secret. And yet somehow, and this is where the unseen hand starts moving, she immediately wins the favor of Haggai.
Haggai is the powerful eunuch in charge of the women.
Out of hundreds, maybe thousands of girls, Haggai looks at Esther and decides to advance her. He gives her the best beauty treatments, the best food, the best quarters in the harem.
And this preparation period lasts for a full 12 months.
A whole year.
6 months with oil of myrrh, 6 months with spices and cosmetics. Finally, in 479 BC, so this is 4 years after Vashti was deposed, Esther's turn comes to go into King Xerxes.
And the text simply says that the king loved Esther more than all the other women, and she won grace and favor in his sight.
He physically takes the royal crown and puts it on her head.
Against all mathematical odds, the vulnerable, hidden Jewish orphan is now the Queen of Persia.
It's an incredible rise to power.
But the narrative refuses to let us catch our breath and just enjoy the coronation. Almost immediately after this, we get this seemingly random subplot.
Right, Mordecai at the gate.
Yeah, Mordecai, who works in some administrative capacity, is sitting at the king's gate. And he happens to overhear 2 royal guards, Bigthan and Teresh, angrily plotting to assassinate King Xerxes.
Mordecai uncovers the plot. He manages to get word to Queen Esther, and Esther informs the king, making sure to give the credit to Mordecai.
The guards are investigated, the plot is confirmed, and the assassins are executed.
Historically, they were likely impaled on a stake, which was the brutal Persian method of execution.
Just awful. And then a scribe writes the event down in the official royal chronicles.
And then
Absolutely nothing happens.
nothing.
Mordecai just saved the life of the most powerful man in the world. You would expect a parade, a promotion, a chest of gold, but he gets 0 reward.
The king just completely forgets about it.
It's a massive bureaucratic oversight. And this is where I want to pause and just look at the board for a second. Okay, let's unpack this. Isn't it fascinating how the stage is set by such mundane, worldly things?
What do you mean?
I mean, we've got a petty domestic dispute at a frat party, of a banquet, a forced beauty pageant, and a lost memo in an administrative office. It feels so incredibly secular.
It really does.
If we compare this massive Persian bureaucracy to a modern, indifferent multinational corporation, it's exactly like Mordecai saved the CEO's life from a hostile takeover, HR filed the paperwork, and it just got lost in a basement filing cabinet.
That corporate analogy is actually perfectly apt. It highlights the banality of the system. But this is exactly where the theology of the book begins to whisper to the careful reader.
How so?
Well, God doesn't need a burning bush to change history. He often uses the secular, chaotic, and seemingly arbitrary decisions of flawed pagan rulers as the raw material for his divine purposes.
Oh, that's good.
Think about the sheer number of coincidences we've just seen.
Right. Out of all the women in 127 provinces, an empire-wide search just happens to select a Jewish orphan.
Her cousin just happens to be sitting at the exact right gate at the exact right time to overhear an assassination plot.
He foils it, but the deed just happens to go completely unrewarded, leaving a massive unpaid debt lingering in the royal archives.
To the naked eye, it is just luck and administrative incompetence. But theology tells us this is the hidden architecture of providence.
But right now, that architecture is invisible. And because Mordecai wasn't promoted, there is still a massive vacuum of power in Xerxes' court right beneath the king.
And that vacuum leaves room for a villain to rise.
Some time has passed. We are now in chapter 3 of the text, and a deeply dark shadow falls over the city of Susa.
Xerxes decides to promote a man named Haman to the position of Grand Vizier.
Basically making him the prime minister of the entire empire.
Yes, he elevates Haman's seat above all the other officials, and the text introduces this man with a very specific, chilling detail.
It calls him Haman the Agagite.
And we cannot gloss over that word.
No.
That single descriptor, Agagite, is the crucial key to understanding the entire conflict of the book.
Right, because this isn't just a sudden political rivalry between 2 bureaucrats.
No, it is the culmination of a biblical blood feud that spans centuries.
Break that down for us, because To a modern reader, Agagite just sounds like a random ancient hometown. What is the historical weight of that title?
To understand it, we have to go all the way back to the book of Exodus.
Yeah.
When the Israelites had just escaped slavery in Egypt, they were tired, they were vulnerable, they were moving through the desert.
Right.
The very first nation to attack them was a nomadic tribe called the Amalekites. But they didn't fight honorably.
No, they don't.
The Amalekites cowardly attacked the rear of the Israelite column. They were slaughtering the stragglers, the sick, the elderly, and the children.
Just a brutal, unprovoked attack.
Exactly. It's such a heinous attack that God swore an eternal war against Amalek from generation to generation.
Okay, so Amalek is the ultimate ancient enemy of the Jewish people, but how does that connect to the word Agagite?
Well, fast forward a few centuries to the era of Israel's first king, King Saul. God commands Saul to execute a final, complete judgment on the Amalekites and their king, whose title was Agag.
Agag, okay.
Saul goes to war, he defeats them, but he disobeys God. He compromises. He scares King Agag and keeps the best of the plunder for himself, which we read about in 1 Samuel 15.
Right, the prophet Samuel eventually has to step in and execute Agag himself.
Yes, but the damage was done. Saul failed to finish the job. Now, remember how the text introduced Mordecai earlier?
It went out of its way to tell us Mordecai was from the tribe of Benjamin, a descendant of the family of Kish.
And who else was the son of Kish from the tribe of Benjamin? King Saul.
Oh, wow. So the author is drawing a direct, flashing neon line between these characters.
Precisely. Here we are, roughly 600 years later. Haman the Agagite is a descendant of the Amalekite king Agag. He is the living remnant of that ancient hatred.
That is wild.
In biblical theology, Amalek represents the persistent demonic effort to exterminate the seed of Abraham. Haman is the ancient enemy manifesting in the present.
It's the cosmic war between the serpent and the woman from Genesis 3 playing out in the Persian court.
Yes. And Mordecai, a descendant of Saul's family, is now standing face to face with Haman, a descendant of Achanak. The stage is set for a rematch.
And that rematch kicks off immediately. King Xerxes commands that all the king's servants at the gate must bow down and pay homage to Haman.
But Mordecai flatly refuses.
Day after day, the other officials ask him, "Why are you transgressing the king's command?" But he will not bow.
And when Haman realizes that Mordecai is refusing to show him reverence, he doesn't just get mad.
No, he is enraged. He is so consumed by this ancient generational hatred that punishing just Mordecai isn't enough for him.
When he finds out Mordecai is a Jew, Haman decides he is going to leverage his new power to exterminate the entire Jewish race within the borders of the Persian Empire.
Men, women, and children, complete annihilation.
Which, we must emphasize, included all the Jews who had recently returned to Jerusalem to rebuild the temple under Zerubbabel.
Because Judah was now a Persian province.
Exactly. This wasn't just a local pogrom. If Haman's plot succeeds, the Jewish people are systematically eradicated from the face of the earth.
Okay, I have to push back here. Because when I read this, I can't help but wonder, why didn't Mordecai just bow?
It's a fair question.
Was he just being stubborn? I mean, by refusing to bend the knee to a political official, isn't he essentially bringing this genocide down upon his own people? It feels incredibly reckless.
It is a profound question, and one that theologians have wrestled with for a long time. In the Persian court, bowing to a superior wasn't just a casual sign of political respect like a modern salute.
Okay, what was it?
It often carried heavy connotations of divine reverence. Persian kings and high officials often viewed themselves in semi-divine terms, demanding literal worship.
Got it.
But even more specifically, for Mordecai, bowing to an Amalekite, the sworn ancient existential enemy of God's people, was tantamount to idolatry.
Because of that ancient blood feud.
Yes, to bow to Haman would be to visually and physically submit to the very force that was trying to destroy God's covenant. It was a direct violation of the first commandment.
Wow.
Mordecai's refusal here actually points forward, acting as a historical blueprint for Christ's refusal to bow to Satan in the wilderness.
Right, when Jesus was offered all the kingdoms of the world if he would just bend the knee.
But he refused. Mordecai would rather face death than give reverence to the literal embodiment of the enemy.
So Mordecai draws his line in the sand, and Haman decides on genocide. But Haman is highly superstitious. He doesn't just pick a date on a calendar.
No, he casts the pur.
The pur, which is the ancient Persian word for the lot. It's essentially an ancient form of rolling dice or casting stones for divination to determine the most auspicious, spiritually favored date for this annihilation.
And the dice land on the 13th day of the month of Adar.
Which happens to be almost exactly 11 months away.
This detail is a profound moment of theological contrast in the text. Haman is relying on superstition, on random chance, on consulting the chaotic fates to bless his endeavor.
It's what modern mathematics might compare to chaos theory, relying on the random tumbling of the dice.
Exactly. But the writer of Esther knows the truth in Proverbs 16.33, which states, "The lot is cast into the lap, but its every decision is from the Lord."
So God is controlling the dice.
Haman thinks he is magically determining the perfect day for his revenge, but God is actually sovereign over the roll of those dice. By making the lot fall 11 months in the future, God is manipulating the timeline.
Giving the Jewish people nearly a full year to prepare.
And giving Esther the necessary window of time to orchestrate a reversal.
So with his date selected, Haman goes to King Xerxes. And his pitch to the king is an absolute masterclass in political manipulation.
It really is.
He doesn't even name the Jewish people. He keeps it super vague to stroke the king's paranoia. He just says, "There is a certain people scattered abroad and dispersed among the peoples in all the provinces of your kingdom. Their laws are different from those of every other people, and they do not keep the king's laws."
Basically saying they are a threat to national security.
Right, so that it is not to the king's profit to tolerate them. If it pleases the king, let it be decreed that they be destroyed.
And then to sweeten the deal, he offers a massive bribe.
Huge bribe. He promises to pay 10,000 talents of silver into the royal treasury.
Which is an astronomical sum.
Our historical sources note that some economists estimate that 10,000 talents of silver was equal to roughly 2/3 of the annual tax revenue of the entire Persian Empire.
And we have to remember the context we established earlier. King Xerxes was likely desperate to replenish his royal treasury after his disastrous, incredibly expensive military defeats in Greece.
Right. Thermopylae and Salamis totally drained the empire.
So Haman is exploiting the king's financial vulnerability to buy a genocide.
But look at the chilling apathy of Xerxes in response. He doesn't even bother to ask who these people are.
He doesn't ask for a trial.
He just casually takes off his signet ring, the ultimate symbol of royal authority, hands it to Haman, and says, "The money is given to you, the people also, to do with them as it seems good to you."
He greenlights a holocaust with the bored wave of a hand.
The banality of evil. The decree is immediately written up by the royal scribes. It is translated into every language and script of the empire, sealed with the king's ring, and sent out by the incredibly fast royal relay couriers to all 127 provinces.
The edict orders the destruction, the killing, and the annihilation of all Jews, young and old, women and children in a single day, and authorizes the plunder of all their goods.
The text says the couriers went out hastily by order of the king, and the decree was issued in Susa. And then it gives us the sickening, contrasting final sentence to chapter 3.
And the king and Haman sat down to drink, but the city of Susa was thrown into confusion.
The ordinary citizens of the capital Persians and Jews alike are horrified by the sudden, sweeping brutality of the law. Meanwhile, the architects of the slaughter are having a glass of wine.
The doomsday clock is officially ticking. And we have to understand how Medo-Persian law worked.
Yeah, explain that, because it's crucial.
Under their legal code, a decree that was written in the king's name and sealed with the king's signet ring was entirely immutable.
Immutable, meaning it cannot be changed.
Right. It was irreversible. Not even the king himself could legally revoke it once it was issued.
Which is such a foreign concept to us today. I mean, if a modern president signs an executive order, they can just tear it up the next day and sign a new one.
But the Persian legal system was essentially an ancient, unalterable smart contract.
Oh, that's a great way to put it.
Once the code was executed and sealed with that ring, it was locked into the ledger of the empire forever. It had to happen.
Which means the only hope for millions of innocent people lies inside the very palace from which the death sentence was just issued.
And we are now moving into chapter 4.
Right. The narrative focus brilliantly narrows down from this massive, empire-wide geopolitical threat to the intense, deeply personal, and frankly terrifying choice facing one single young woman.
Esther?
When Mordecai learns everything that has been done, he tears his clothes, puts on sackcloth and ashes, and goes out into the midst of the city wailing with a loud and bitter cry.
He goes right up to the entrance of the king's gate, but he can't go further because no one is allowed to enter the king's gate clothed in sackcloth.
And it's important to note how isolated Esther is at this point. She is living in the extreme luxury of the royal harem, completely insulated from the chaos of the streets.
She is initially totally unaware of the decree.
But her maids and eunuchs see Mordecai wailing and tell her. She is deeply distressed and sends clothes to Mordecai so he can take off his sackcloth, but he refuses.
So she sends her most trusted eunuch, Hathach, to go out to the square and find out exactly what is happening.
Hathach becomes the middleman for one of the most intense conversations in history.
He really does.
Mordecai tells Hathach everything. He even tells him the exact sum of money, the 10,000 talents of silver that Haman promised to pay into the treasury.
He smuggles a written copy of the actual decree to Hathach to physically hand to Esther, so she can see the proof with her own eyes.
And he gives her a direct, heavy command. She must go into the king to beg for favor and plead with him on behalf of her people.
But Esther sends a message back, explaining the fatal catch. She lays out the reality of Persian court protocol.
She tells Hathach to tell Mordecai, all the king's servants and the people of the king's provinces know that if any man or woman goes to the king inside the inner court without being called, there is but one law to be put to death.
The only exception is if the king holds out the golden scepter to him, that he may live. And as for me, I have not been called to come in to the king these 30 days.
We really need to pause and put ourselves in her shoes to feel the sheer terror of her situation.
Oh, absolutely. She is the queen, yes, but her predecessor, Queen Vashti, was banished and stripped of her royal title simply for refusing to come when she was called.
Right. And now Esther is being asked to do the inverse, to go in unsummoned.
And the fact that King Xerxes hasn't wanted to see his own wife in a full month suggests a chilling possibility.
That she might already be falling out of favor.
Exactly. And remember who she is dealing with? Xerxes is a highly volatile man who just authorized the genocide of a whole race of people without even blinking.
He impales his enemies on 75-foot poles.
If he is in a bad mood, if he is distracted, or if he is simply annoyed by the interruption, the law mandates her immediate execution the moment she crosses the threshold into the inner court.
It's not a risk. It's a near certainty of death. She has the title of queen, but she has absolutely zero real security. She is entirely vulnerable.
And this is where Mordecai responds by delivering what is arguably the most famous ultimatum in all of Scripture.
He strips away any illusion of safety she might have been clinging to in the palace.
He sends word back to her. Do not think to yourself that in the king's palace you will escape any more than all the other Jews. For if you keep silent at this time, relief and deliverance will rise for the Jews from another place. But you and your father's house will perish.
And who knows whether you have not come to the kingdom for such a time as this.
For such a time as this? I mean, it still gives you chills just hearing it.
It really does. It is the ultimate expression of the theological doctrine of providential vocation.
Right. If we connect this to the bigger picture, God doesn't place his people in positions of comfort, wealth, or influence for their own personal sake or safety.
He places them there strategically for his overarching purposes.
Mordecai's statement is a profound declaration of unwavering faith. Notice his exact phrasing. He doesn't say, God will deliver us again. The name of God remains hidden. But he confidently asserts that relief and deliverance will rise from another place.
He knows the ancient covenant promises.
Yes. He knows that the Jewish people cannot be completely wiped out because the prophesied Messiah must eventually come through them. The survival of the Jewish race is guaranteed by divine promise.
But he places the immediate challenge squarely on Esther's shoulders.
Basically saying, God's plan will succeed, but will you be the instrument he uses? Or will you forfeit your role in this story?
Esther is backed into a terrifying corner, but she rises to the occasion with incredible, breathtaking courage.
She makes her resolve.
She tells Mordecai to gather all the Jews who are present in Susa and hold a complete, absolute fast on her behalf. For 3 days and 3 nights, no food and no water.
She and her young women will do the exact same thing in the palace.
And then she delivers her final answer. Then I will go to the king, though it is against the law, and if I perish, I perish.
If I perish, I perish. The theological weight of that phrase is immense. Esther is deliberately stepping into the role of a mediator.
She is choosing to risk her own life, to face the wrath of the king, to intercede for her condemned people.
To explain the deeper concept here, theologians often refer to this as a literary foreshadowing. Esther's agonizing resolve perfectly mirrors the agonizing resolve of Jesus Christ in the Garden of Gethsemane.
Okay.
Facing the terrifying wrath of God and the certainty of the cross, Jesus prays, "Not my will, but yours be done," as recorded in Luke 22:42.
Just as Jesus voluntarily stepped between humanity and judgment, Esther is voluntarily placing herself between the executioner and her people.
She is willing to be the sacrifice.
She has fully made her peace with death. So after 3 agonizing days of fasting, she takes off her mourning clothes, she puts on her royal robes, and she steps into the inner court of the king's palace.
We are in chapter 5 now, and the tension is at its absolute peak.
Esther stands in the inner court, unsummoned, waiting for the king to notice her. Xerxes is sitting on his royal throne. He looks up. He sees Queen Esther standing in the court.
And the text says she won favor in his sight.
He reaches out and he extends the golden scepter toward her. Esther approaches and touches the tip of the scepter. Her life is officially spared.
The relief in that moment must have been overwhelming. And Xerxes is so moved by her presence, or perhaps by her obvious distress, that he says, "What is it, Queen Esther? What is your request? It shall be given you, even to the half of my kingdom."
Now, that is an ancient diplomatic idiom. He isn't literally offering her half the empire.
Right, but it means he is highly disposed to grant her virtually any reasonable petition.
And this is where the story takes a turn that always frustrates me on the first read. You'd think right here, in this moment of extreme favor, she would drop to her knees, burst into tears, and scream, "Your Prime Minister Haman is trying to slaughter me and my entire family."
It's what anyone would expect her to do.
But she doesn't. Instead of begging for her life, she executes this brilliant, agonizing delay. She maintains her composure and says, "If it pleases the king, let the king and Haman come today to a feast that I have prepared for the king."
It is masterstroke of psychological timing. She knows she is asking the king to reverse a major policy decision and execute his favorite right-hand man. She needs the setting to be perfect.
But what makes it even more agonizing is that even at that first private banquet later that day, when the king drinks wine with her and asks her again, "What is your petition? It shall be granted you," she delays a second time.
She invites the king and Haman to come back for yet another banquet the very next day, promising to finally reveal her request then.
Okay, let's unpack this. Why does she do that? Does she lose her nerve the last second?
From a purely human psychological perspective, perhaps she sensed the mood wasn't quite right, or that Haman was too comfortable, or that the king wasn't pliant enough yet. She was reading the room.
Makes sense.
But from a divine perspective, that 24-hour delay is the most crucial, mathematically precise window in the entire narrative. God needed that specific night to orchestrate the downfall of Haman through Haman's own blinding hubris.
And hubris is exactly what we see on full display. Haman leaves that first banquet absolutely thrilled.
He is the only official in the entire empire invited to dine privately with the king and queen. He is on top of the world.
But on his way home, he passes the king's gate, and there is Mordecai. And Mordecai doesn't just refuse to bow, the text says he doesn't even stand up or tremble before him.
Haman's joy instantly evaporates. It's replaced by blind, consuming rage.
He restrains himself in public, goes home, and calls for his friends and his wife Zeresh.
And he proceeds to boast to them about the vastness of his riches, his many sons, all the ways the king had honored him, and his exclusive invitation from Queen Esther.
But then he delivers a line that perfectly exposes the miserable reality of pride. Yet all this is worth nothing to me so long as I see Mordecai the Jew sitting at the king's gate.
His pride is so fragile, so toxic, that one man's quiet defiance completely ruins his entire existence.
So his wife Zeresh and his friends give him some terrible, enabling advice. They essentially tell him, "You're the prime minister. Why are you letting this guy ruin your week? Don't wait 11 months for the general decree. Have a gallows made 50 cubits high."
50 cubits is about 75 feet in the air.
This isn't a Western-style hangman's noose. Historians tell us this was likely a massive wooden spike designed for impalement.
Meant to display the victim high above the city as a terrifying public warning.
They tell Haman, "Build it tonight, and tomorrow morning go to the king and ask for permission to hang Mordecai on it before you go to the banquet."
And Haman loves this idea. He orders the 75-foot pole constructed in his own courtyard that very night.
Here's where it gets really interesting. Right here in chapter 6, we hit the grand pivot of the entire narrative.
That very night, King Xerxes suffers from insomnia. The text simply says, "On that night the king could not sleep."
And this is where the unseen hand of God is working overtime. Out of all the things a restless king could do in the middle of the night, he could call for musicians to play, he could call for his concubines, he could ask for more wine.
But instead, he asks for the royal chronicles, the dry, boring, daily administrative records of his reign, to be brought and read to him to help him fall asleep.
The theology of the sleepless night is profound.
This is the biblical concept of Romans 8.28 playing out in vivid narrative form. And we know that for those who love God, all things work together for good.
God uses a pagan king's indigestion, or his anxiety, or his random bout of insomnia to radically alter the course of human history.
And it gets even more specific. As the servant is reading these boring administrative files, out of all the years of records and thousands of pages, the reader just happens to open to the exact entry from years ago where Mordecai exposed the assassination plot of Bigthan and Teresh.
Saving the king's life.
The exact page is read at the exact moment, just hours before Haman is scheduled to arrive at dawn to ask for Mordecai's execution.
Xerxes stops the servant and asks, "What honor or distinction has been bestowed on Mordecai for this?" The servants check the records and reply, "Nothing has been done for him."
The king is appalled that a man who saved his life was ignored.
Just then, he hears footsteps out in the courtyard. It's early morning. It's Haman, who has arrived as early as possible to ask the king's permission to impale Mordecai on the 75-foot spike.
The timing is surgical. The king asks who is in the court, and the servants tell him it's Haman.
The king tells him to enter, and before Haman can even open his mouth to ask for Mordecai's death, Xerxes beats him to the punch with a question.
What should be done for the man whom the king delights to honor?
It is the greatest setup in recorded history. Haman, utterly blinded by his own narcissism and fresh off his ego trip from the banquet, thinks in his heart, "Whom would the king delight to honor more than me? Obviously, he's talking about me."
So Haman swings for the fences. He pitches the ultimate royal fantasy.
He says, "For the man whom the king delights to honor, let royal robes be brought, which the king has worn, and the horse that the king has ridden, and on whose head a royal crown is set.
And let the robes and the horse be handed over to one of the king's most noble officials. Let him dress the man whom the king delights to honor, and let him lead the man on the horse through the square of the city, proclaiming before him, 'Thus shall it be done to the man whom the king delights to honor.'"
You can almost hear the cosmic laughter of God echoing in this room.
Psalm 2 tells us, "He who sits in the heavens laughs. The Lord holds them in derision."
Xerxes looks at Haman and says, "Hurry, take the robes and the horse, as you have said, and do so to Mordecai the Jew who sits at the king's gate. Leave out nothing that you have mentioned."
I mean, it reads like a pitch-black comedy.
Haman is literally holding the execution order in his pocket, ready to hang his enemy, and instead he is forced to act as his enemy's personal hype man.
He has to personally dress Mordecai in the king's robes, lead him on the king's horse through the sprawling streets of Susa, and shout his praises to the entire city.
It is a devastating, soul-crushing humiliation for a man as proud as Haman.
And the contrast in their reactions afterward is deeply telling. After the parade, Mordecai quietly returns to his post at the king's gate.
He isn't corrupted by the sudden honor.
No, he is still in mourning, still wearing sackcloth underneath, still laser-focused on the impending genocide of his people.
But Haman rushes home in absolute grief, his head covered in shame. He tells his wife Zeresh and his friends everything that just happened.
And notice their chilling response. Just 24 hours earlier, they were egging him on to commit murder. Now they don't comfort him at all.
Instead, they offer a dark, inescapable prophecy. "If Mordecai, before whom you have begun to fall, is of the Jewish people, you will not overcome him, but will surely fall before him."
That is wild. Even these pagan, Amalekite-sympathizing advisors recognize that there is a higher, sovereign power actively protecting the Jewish people. They see the writing on the wall.
But before Haman can even process this horrifying realization, there's a loud knock at his door. The king's eunuchs have arrived to abruptly whisk him away to Queen Esther's second banquet.
Which brings us to Chapter 7, the absolute documentary climax of the story.
All the hidden pieces God has been quietly moving across the board suddenly snap together in a stunning, violent display of justice.
The king, Esther, and Haman are reclining at the second banquet. They're drinking wine. Xerxes asks for the third time, "What is your petition, Queen Esther? It shall be granted you."
"And what is your request? Even to the half of my kingdom it shall be fulfilled."
And now the delay is over. The trap is perfectly sprung. Esther finally drops the veil.
She pleads for her life. She says, "If I have found favor in your sight, O king, and if it please the king, let my life be granted me for my wish, and my people for my request. For we have been sold, I and my people, to be destroyed, to be killed, and to be annihilated."
She intentionally uses the exact, brutal legal language of Haman's own decree.
She continues, "If we had been sold merely as slaves, men and women, I would have been silent, for our affliction is not to be compared with the loss to the king."
You have to imagine the absolute shock hitting King Xerxes in that moment. He had no idea his beautiful, favored queen was Jewish.
He had no idea that the piece of paper he casually signed and handed his signet ring over for condemned his own wife to slaughter.
He's outraged, humiliated, and confused. He demands, who is he and where is he who has dared do this?
And Esther points her finger directly across the table, right at the man who thought he was untouchable, and delivers the lethal blow. A foe and enemy, this wicked Haman.
The text notes that Haman was terrified before the king and queen. And he should be. Xerxes is so consumed with rage that he can't even speak.
He storms out of the banquet hall into the palace garden to collect himself. He has to figure out how to handle the political nightmare that his own prime minister just manipulated him into ordering the death of his queen.
Realizing his life is over, Haman utterly panics. He stays behind to beg Queen Esther for his life. In his frantic desperation, he stumbles and falls upon the couch where Esther is reclining.
And at that exact, precise, mathematically perfect moment, Xerxes walks back into the room from the garden.
And the king, already looking for an excuse to execute Haman, misinterprets the scene entirely. He cries out, "Will he even assault the queen in my presence, in my own house?"
As soon as those words left the king's mouth, the guard stepped forward and covered Haman's face.
In the ancient Persian court, covering the face meant you were a dead man walking. You were no longer fit to look upon the king.
Talk about the architecture of hatred becoming the literal architecture of a man's demise. Right at that moment, Harbona, one of the king's eunuchs who must have been thoroughly sick of Haman's arrogance, helpfully chimes in.
He says, "Hey, king, did you know there's a 75-foot gallows standing right now at Haman's house, which he made for Mordecai, the man whose words saved the king?"
And Xerxes doesn't hesitate for a second. He says, "Hang him on that."
The text concludes the scene starkly. So they hanged Haman on the gallows that he had prepared for Mordecai. Then the wrath of the king abated.
Wow.
This moment is the pinnacle of a macro theme we see woven throughout all of biblical literature, often called the Great Reversal.
Proverbs 26.27 warns, "Whoever digs a pit will fall into it, and a stone will come back on him who starts it rolling."
The arrogant are humbled, and the humble are exalted. But there is a much more profound structural foreshadowing happening here. The gallows of Haman serve as a stark, undeniable blueprint for the cross of Jesus Christ.
Explain the connection, because that's really profound.
Just as Haman, the ancient enemy of God's people, is utterly destroyed on the very instrument of death he meticulously prepared for God's righteous servant, so too the ultimate enemy, Satan, is defeated at Calvary. Christ is nailed to a cross that was designed by the enemy to destroy the Son of God and meant to punish guilty sinners. But by that very instrument of apparent defeat, Jesus disarms the demonic powers, pays the penalty for sin, and triumphs over them entirely, exactly as the Apostle Paul explains in Colossians 2:14-15.
The weapon of the enemy becomes the tool of his own destruction.
Exactly.
That is an incredible connection. It completely changes how you read the violence of the scene. It's not just a political assassination. It's a structural promise of how God ultimately deals with evil.
It absolutely is.
But as we move into the final chapters of the book, chapters 8 through 10, we are faced with a massive, lingering logistical nightmare. Yes, the villain is dead, Haman is hanging on a pole, but the law he wrote is still very much alive.
Exactly. We discussed this earlier with the smart contract analogy. According to the immutable laws of the Medes and Persians, a decree sealed with the king's ring cannot be revoked or canceled.
The code is locked in.
The 13th of Adar is still a legally sanctioned day of empire-wide genocide against the Jews, and there are plenty of people who hated the Jews and were eager to carry it out to claim their property.
Esther falls at the king's feet weeping, begging him to avert the evil plan of Haman. The king extends the golden scepter again.
He gives Mordecai Haman's old job as prime minister, hands Mordecai the royal signet ring, and basically tells them, "I can't cancel the first law, but you have the ring. Write another decree concerning the Jews as you please, and seal it with the king's ring."
So Mordecai uses the legal loophole. Since they cannot physically unwrite the first law, Mordecai drafts a brilliant, aggressive counter-decree.
It grants the Jews in every single city the royal authority to gather together, arm themselves, and fight back to destroy, kill, and annihilate any armed force of any people or province that might attack them, their children, or their women on the 13th of Adar, and to plunder their goods.
The scribes write it up, and couriers ride out on the fastest royal relay horses to spread the news across all 127 provinces. Okay, I need to stop you here. Because chapter 8 and chapter 9 always bother me, and I think they bother a lot of modern readers. Mordecai's counter decree essentially authorizes a massive bloodbath.
It does, yes.
Later in the text, it says the Jews struck down their enemies with the sword, killing 75,000 people across the empire, including Haman's 10 sons. That feels incredibly violent and vengeful to find in a text that is supposed to be holy. How do we reconcile that level of violence?
It's a very fair critique, and one that modern readers struggle with, but we have to analyze it within the brutal realities of ancient warfare and Medo-Persian law.
Okay.
First, the Jews did not initiate the violence. They were facing total extermination by an armed populace eager to steal their wealth. Mordecai's decree gave them the legal right to self-defense, which they previously lacked. If they hadn't fought back, they would have been massacred.
So it's purely self-defense.
Second, the text repeatedly emphasizes a very specific detail to show their restraint. 3 separate times in chapter 9, the author notes, but they laid no hand on the plunder.
Which is huge, because Haman's decree encouraged people to kill the Jews to steal their money.
Exactly. While their enemies fought for plunder, the Jews fought purely for survival.
Right.
By refusing the plunder, they demonstrated this was a holy war of self-defense, not a greedy massacre.
And as for Haman's 10 sons?
Well, in the ancient world, leaving the sons of a blood-feud enemy alive guaranteed a retaliatory war in the next generation. They were the continuation of the Amalekite threat, and executing them definitively ended the Agagite line.
That context helps immensely. It wasn't unprovoked aggression, it was desperate state-sanctioned self-defense against a populace that was coming to slaughter their children.
Right, and the atmosphere in the empire completely flips when the second decree goes out. Susa shouts and rejoices. The text says the Jews had light, gladness, joy, and honor.
And there is this incredible detail in chapter 8, verse 17. And many from the peoples of the country declared themselves Jews, for fear of the Jews had fallen on them.
It's an amazing moment of evangelism through reversal. The pagan citizens see that the God of the Jews, even though he isn't named, is clearly fighting for them.
They see the sovereign protection over this minority group, and they want to be part of that covenant.
When the 13th of Adar finally arrives 11 months later, the great reversal is fully realized. The enemies of the Jews had hoped to overpower them, but instead, the Jews gained mastery over those who hated them. They survive.
And to ensure this massive, miraculous deliverance is never forgotten, Esther and Mordecai establish an annual holiday.
We call it the Feast of Purim, named after the pur, the ancient dice that Haman cast to determine the date of their destruction.
It's to be celebrated every year on the 14th and 15th of Adar with feasting, gladness, giving gifts of food to one another, and giving generously to the poor.
And this is where the history leaps right off the page into the modern world. Purim is still vibrantly celebrated by Jewish people around the globe today.
It has a continuous, unbroken observance of over 2,400 years.
During the festival, the entire book of Esther is read aloud in the synagogue. Every time Haman's name is mentioned, the congregation boos and shakes noisemakers to blot out his name. And every time Mordecai is mentioned, they cheer.
It is one of the strongest external historical confirmations of the authenticity of this book. You simply do not have a 2,400-year-old, continuous, culturally entrenched celebration based on a pure fiction. The trauma and the deliverance were profoundly real.
It is an incredible legacy.
But before we wrap this up, I want to dive into the deepest part of the pool. So what does this all mean? Throughout this entire hour, we've repeatedly mentioned the elephant in the room, that God's name is completely absent from the text.
Right.
Which brings us to the ultimate question of the book. Why hide the name? Why not just write, and then Yahweh gave the king insomnia, or, and then the Lord made the king angry at Haman?
The author is deliberately teaching us a profound theology of everyday life. If God had written himself explicitly into the narrative with overt, sky-splitting miracles, we might fall into the trap of thinking he only operates through the spectacular.
Right.
By hiding his name, the author is showing us that God's providence is just as active, just as sovereign, and just as powerful in the mundane, secular, bureaucratic machinery of a pagan empire as it was when he parted the Red Sea.
He is actively, quietly preserving the covenant line. Because remember, every attempt to destroy the Jews, whether by Pharaoh in Egypt, Haman in Persia, or later, King Herod in the New Testament, is ultimately a satanic attempt to stop the prophesied Messiah from being born.
God preserves Israel in the darkness of Persia so that, centuries later, a virgin in Bethlehem can safely give birth to the Son of God.
That completely reframes the entire story. The book of Esther teaches us that when God seems entirely absent, when the world seems secular and chaotic, He's actually most active. He is the unseen director moving every single piece on the board.
The king's insomnia, a bureaucrat's forgotten administrative memo, the blind pride of an ancient villain, the terrifying courage of an orphaned girl. None of it was luck. None of it was chaos. It was all sovereign grace.
It is a masterpiece of providence. And this raises an important question, bringing us to a final thought for you, the listener, to mull over as we close.
Most of us will never experience a parting Red Sea or a literal burning bush in our own lives. We don't live in an era of overt, sea-splitting biblical miracles.
Most of us live in a secular, complex, often overwhelming environment that looks and feels very much like ancient Susa. Our lives feel dictated by flawed human bureaucracies, petty bosses, shifting economic policies, and what appears to be random, chaotic chance.
The book of Esther invites you to look much closer at the fabric of your own life. If the creator of the universe can use a pagan king's indigestion, a misplaced administrative file, and the arrogant hubris of an ancient enemy to save the world and preserve the lineage of the Savior, what seemingly random coincidences in your own life are actually the hidden fingerprints of the author?
What if the challenges you are facing, the agonizing delays you are enduring, and the precise mundane placements of your life are not accidents at all, but God quietly and purposefully positioning you for such a time as this?
Thank you for joining us on this week's episode of the Story Behind Scripture, Books of the Bible series. Next week, Faith Goes on Trial, an in-depth look at the book of Job.
If you'd like to read more about the stories behind Scripture, try Written in Fire, available on Amazon.com. It's the story of the destruction of Solomon's temple, told through the pages of the Bible and the voices of the prophets. The fire that destroyed the city and the temple did not end in ashes, but in a Messiah. Pick up Written in Fire on Amazon today.